Good day, everyone. Our topic for today is past 37 provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. But before that, let me introduce to you our group. We are Group 20. I am Ira Jean P. Meneses, together with Miss Justin Loy S. Mendoza, Miss Jonalyn May M. De Vera, Miss Margie Diaz Vargas, and Miss Jim Rose S. Ngo. So before we proceed to our report, I want to share some important reminders on how to study topics under intermediate accounting or the financial accounting. First is we have to know kung ano yung pinag-aaralang line item. Aalamin natin kung ano yung accounting standards na mag-govern. Second is alamin naman natin kung ano yung mga scope ng mga standards kasi minsan sa mga problem solving may mga lalabas sa problem na akala mo kasama siya nung specific standard na inaaral mo pero ibang standard pa lang nag-govern sa kanya. Kaya it is very important na dapat alam mo kung anong scope. Third is alamin natin yung mga important definition of terms. It will be part of your mastery kasi from the definition of terms, gumagawa sila ng problem na may apply mo sa kung ano ba yung mga na-master mong terms. Number 4 is alamin kung paano natin i-recognize, kailan i-record, kailan a-appear sa financial statements. So, dalawa yan, initial and subsequent. Number 5 is how to measure. Ano ang measurement? So, ganun din. Meron siyang initial and subsequent measurement. Next is to know the important journal entries na related dun sa transaction na pinag-uusapan natin. Next is how to present. You have to know kung yan ba ay asset, liability, equity, revenue and expense, or income and expense. And last is the disclosure. Dapat alam natin kung ano yung mga dinidisclose. So I just shared the guidelines to refresh our minds or to review our minds. So we come now to the main topic. So first things first, ano ba ang applicable accounting standards ng pag-aaralan natin ngayon? Siyempre, ang ating standard na mag-govern ay PAS 37 entitled Provisions, Contingent Liabilities, and Contingent Assets. So in this session, we will identify the differences of these three terms. But before that, let us know the learning objectives of this session. So at the end of this session, we have to be able to state the recognition criteria for provisions. Number 2, differentiate the accounting requirement of a provision, a contingent liability, and a contingent asset. Number 3, we have to be able to describe the available measurement basis for a provision and account for provision. So here are the examples of provisions. We have warranty obligations, estimated liability on pending lawsuits, provisions for environmental damages, provisions of decommissioning costs of an item of PPE, obligations caused by an entity's policy to make refunds to customers, obligations arising from guarantee, provisions on onerous contract. Example is the purchase commitment. And last is the provisions of restructuring costs. So we come now to the definition of terms. So sabi dito, a provision is a liability of uncertain timing or amount. So liability ang isang provision, yun nga lang, it daw ay may uncertain timing or amount. Uncertain timing kasi hindi natin alam kung kailan mag-occur. That is why we just have to provide. Kaya siya sinabing provision. We just provide and we just estimate the amount of provision or yung liability natin dito. Kasi nga uncertain yung timing or yung amount. So provision differ from other liabilities because of the uncertainty. So yun yung nagsaseparate sa kanya from other classifications of liability. Yung uncertainty niya when it comes to timing or sa amount. About the timing or amount of expenditure required in settlement. So, karamihan ng mga na-encounter nating problem sa provision is yung mga nagkakaroon ng lawsuit or yung mga sampahan ng kaso. O kaya yung mga dispute sa BIR. Yun yung mga karamihang nagiging examples dito sa provisions. So, halimbawa is nagsampa ng kaso si employee sa company. So, pag kunwari is ikaw si company, magpro-provide ba tayo or may provisions ba tayo about the damages, something like that. Kaya sabi dito, required in settlement. And unlike other liabilities, provisions must be estimated kasi yung ibang mga napag-aralan nating liabilities, just like the financial liabilities, they are measured at fair value or fair value minus transaction cost. So, depende kung ano yung classification. So, itong provision, based siya sa estimate. And although some other liabilities are also estimated, which is true, for example, is yung warranty liability, in-estimate rin natin yon, but their uncertainty is much less than for provisions. Meaning, for example, yung warranty liability, nagbenta ka and meron siyang 1 year warranty, na-estimate mo doon kung magkano yung magagastos dun sa pagbalik. Less daw yung uncertainty nun kasi possible talaga na may bumalik. Yung sa provisions kasi, for example, may kaso, yung pag-claim ng mga damages, diba, it is more uncertain than dun sa mga warranty. Medyo mas mabigat yung usapan pag sinabing provision. That is why meron siyang separate line item sa financial statement. So, hindi siya nakasama sa trade and other payables. Kaya nga sabi dito, other payables such as accruals are reported as part of the trade and other payables, whereas provisions are reported separately. Kasi pag sinabi nating provision, may bigat siya dahil nga ang karamihan na na-encounter natin pag nagpro-provide ng provisions is yung mga sampahan ng kaso na pwedeng matalo or pwedeng manalo. So if you're gonna look at a financial statement and if nakaklasify yung provisions sa trade and other payables, medyo hindi mo siya makikita para siyang ginawang hindi importante. Where in fact, sa provisions, sampahan ng kaso ang pinag-uusapan. May damages na dapat bayadan, or example, meron kang dispute sa BIR, yung mga deficiency sa tax, kailangan mo bayadan, kailangan mo isettle, kailangan mong ipakita talaga yon. Kaya kailangan naka-record siya separately. So next, dito is direkta na siyang dinifferentiate. So ano nga bang pinagkaiba ng provision at ano nga ba ang contingent liability? So basically, pag sinabi nating provisions, liability na nire-recognize, ibig sabihin uma-appear siya sa financial statement, particularly sa balance sheet, at nire-record mo siya na may debit credit. Pag sinabi namang contingent liability, yung bottom line explanation nito is ito kasing contingent, uncertain rin pero hindi siya probable na ma-record. Yung uncertainty niya talaga napakataas. Yun yung pagkakaiba ng dalawa. So, mag-annotate tayo para ma-explain further yung pagkakaiba ng dalawa. So, si provisions daw ay present obligation. Diba ang definition ng liability is present obligation as a result of past event or transaction which will make an outflow or embodying economic resources. Diba magkakaroon ng outflow of resources. So, yun yung definition ng liability. So, si provision, dahil under liability siya, present obligation ang classification and classification, whereas si contingent liability naman is possible obligation naman yung sa classification niya. Ano ba ang meaning ng possible? 50% pwedeng mangyari, 50% hindi pwedeng mangyari. We all know na sa accounting, meron tayong tatlong levels. The probable, possible, and the remote. Pag sinabi mo kasing probable, ibig sabihin more than 50% na pwedeng mangyari. Ngayon, pag sinabi nating possible, 50% pwede, 50% hindi. Kaya contingent. And then, pag sinabi naman nating remote, mababa talaga yung chance na mangyari siya. So, ignore pag remote. And then, pag provision, katulad sa liability, it should be probable na merong outflow of economic resources, may lalabas talagang asset or property sa'yo dahil isa-settle mo yung obligation, and measured reliably. Pag sinabi nating measured reliably is either yung face amount alam natin or madedetermine natin kung magkano or kaya natin i-estimate. At ang term na best estimate, pag sinabi natin best estimate, merong basis talaga, hindi lang siya basta kathang isip lang. Si contingent liability naman, present obligation din siya, but not probable. Kasi nga possible yung obligation. Or present obligation but not measured reliably. Kasi nga ang tatandaan natin, if you will be recording something and it will appear in FS or in financial statement, dapat probable and measured reliably. Next is provision is recognized or accrued in the statement of financial position. Sabi nga natin, hindi siya isinasama sa trade and other payables, particularly kung materials. Meron siyang separate line item. Si contingent liability naman, hindi siya nire-recognize, meaning hindi i-record, walang debit credit na mangyayari, not accrued in the statement of financial position. Kasi nga, although it is a present obligation, it is not probable or it is not measured reliably. So, itong contingent liability, sa madaling salita, kung ito ay material, importante siya, this will affect the users of financial statements. Ibig sabihin, i-disclose mo ito. I-disclose, ibig sabihin, makikita siya sa notes of financial statement. Kinikwento mo doon na, for example, matalo tayo sa isang kaso, possible na magkakaroon tayo ng damages na babayadan or liability na babayadan. So, yun yung pinakaiba basically ni provision at ni contingent liability. Next slide is na-define na natin yung mga important definition of terms, na-differentiate na natin si provisions kay contingent liability. So, let's now go to the recognition. So, sabi dito, when to recognize provision. So, kailan nga ba? A provision is recognized when all of the following conditions are met. So, dapat itong lahat na ito ay ma-meet niya. Number one, the entity has a present obligation, legal or constructive, as a result of a past event. In short, kung ano yung definition of liability, dapat mag-fit siya doon. So, ano yung definition ng liability natin? It should be a present obligation as a result of past events or transaction which embodies outflow of economic resources. Number two, it is probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits will be required to settle the obligation. So, ibig sabihin, babayadan mo to sa kung paanong paraan sa paano nga tayo magse-settle ng obligation natin. Of course, pwedeng bayadan ng cash, isettle mo ng cash, and of course, pwede din non-cash, pwedeng property, receivable, or inventory, pwede ka din mag-provide ng services. Number three, a reliable estimate can be made of the amount of the obligation. So, pag sinabi nating reliable estimate, hindi basta hinulaan lang. Meron tayong tinatawag na professional judgment. Tatanungin talaga natin yung mga expert para ma-measure natin kung magkano talaga. Reliable estimate or best estimate. So, that's how you recognize provision. If hindi na-meet ang mga criteria na to, hindi siya pwedeng i-recognize. Kung hindi siya pwedeng i-recognize, it is classified as contingent liability. At pag contingent liability, dapat i-disclose kung material. Next is, ito yung nasabi ko na kanina, probable, possible, and remote. So, unahin natin si remote. Pag remote, do nothing. Ignore. Huwag mo na siyang i-disclose. Huwag mo siyang i-record. Wala kang gagawin. But if the present obligation is possible, you have to disclose it only as contingent liability and do not recognize. Probable naman is provision na siya kasi outflow of economic benefits is both probable and reliably estimable na siya. And provide appropriate disclosures pag probable. So for the next slide, it will be reported by Ms. Justin Loy S. Mendoza.
Thank you, Ms. Meneses. Now, let's proceed to contingent asset. So what is a contingent asset? Contingent asset defined as a possible asset or a possible inflows of economic benefits from unplanned or unexpected events such as claims that an entity is seeking through legal processes where the legal outcome is uncertain. Contingent asset will also not be recognized. So, hindi din po natin ito nire-recognize as an asset or not recognized also as an income. But only what? Only disclosed on the notes to the financial statements. So, disclose lang din ang ating contingent asset. Paano naman kapag virtually certain or 100% yung chance of occurrence? So, when the realization of income is virtually certain, the asset is not a contingent asset, and therefore it is appropriate to recognize it. So dito, meron tayong apat na klase ng probability, which is reasonably certain, probable, possible, and remote. So let's talk about liabilities muna. Kapag liabilities ang pinag-uusapan, recognize muna tayo. Recognize kapag probable yan. Kapag possible, disclosed only. Pero kapag remote lang yung chance, ignore lang po natin yan. Once again, kapag remote, ini-ignore lang natin yan. So, those are the rules kapag liabilities. So, bakit natin siya dinidisclose kapag possible? Because kapag possible, contingent liability na ang tawag natin dyan. And recognize siya dito sa probable because it is a provision. It's just that uncertain pa. Paano kapag reasonably certain yan? Kapag reasonably certain yan, totoo na siyang liability natin. Kasi malapit-lapit na siya sa certainty. Now, let's talk about contingent asset. Pagdating naman sa asset, see to it na kapag reasonably certain ang asset, doon lang siya nire-recognize. Ibig sabihin, kapag probable lang ang isang asset, dinidisclose lang natin yan. So, bakit natin dinidisclose lang? Because kapag probable lang po yung chance na magiging asset talaga yan, dito lang po siya nagiging contingent asset. Kapag possible naman, see to it na ini-ignore lang natin yan. Yan, kapag possible, ini-ignore lang natin. Yan. Mas lalo naman kapag remote yan. So, ibig sabihin, mas malala kapag asset. Because dito, meron tayong tinatawag na prudence or conservatism. Ibig sabihin ng conservatism or prudence, asset and income must not be overstated. Therefore, mas stricto tayo doon. Then, liabilities must not be understated. Kaya tayo mas maluwag kapag liability. So, kapag liability, kapag probable, recognize na. Pero kapag asset, bago mo i-recognize, dapat reasonably certain yan. Kapag probable ang isang asset, contingent asset. Therefore, i-disclose natin yan. Pero kapag possible and remote, ini-ignore lang natin yan. To apply all of these, meron tayong problem dito. Meron tayong mga example problems. So, sample problem number 1. In May 2026, Pepper Company filed lawsuit against Rain Company, seeking 1.9 million damages for patent infringement. So, tayo si Pepper dito and tayo yung nagdemanda dito, no? And a court verdict in November 2026 awarded Pepper 1.5 million in damages. But Rain's appeal is not expected to be decided before 2027. Ibig sabihin, nag-appeal si Rain. Connor Walsh, the first chair in the trial and one of the students in Analyze Keating's class section, believe that it is probable that Pepper will be successful against Rain for an estimated amount in the range between 800,000 and 1.1 million, with 1 million considered the most likely amount. So the question is, what amount should Pepper record as income from the lawsuit for the year ended December 31, 2026? So kapag ganito yung given, huwag mo nang kunin yung range. Yung 1M na agad ang gagamitin, yung 1 million. So, kaso dito, anong meron? Probable lang na meron tayong marireceive. So, ano yung usapan natin? Bago tayo mag-recognize ng asset at gain, dapat reasonably certain yan. So, kung probable lang na magiging successful tayo against Rain, see to it na kapag tinanong tayo ngayon na what amount should Pepper record as income from the lawsuit for the year entities December 31, 2026. Our final answer will still be 0. Kasi nga, probable pa lang. Ibig sabihin, the amount of the income year will only be disclosed. Pero kung liability ito, obvious naman na i-recognize na natin yan kasi considered na siya as provision. Kasi kapag liabilities, kapag probable pa lang, nare-recognize na natin. So here's the answer, 0 or none. So a contingent asset and related contingent gain are disclosed only where the inflow of economic benefits is probable. Next is the problem. Next, problem number 2. Problem number 2. On November 1, 2018, Kakashi Company was awarded a judgment of 1.5 million in connection with a lawsuit. So kapag parang sinasabi niya dito na si Kakashi Company daw ay awarded, pwede kang makaklaim ng 1.5 regarding doon sa legal case na inilalaban mo. The decision is being appealed by the defendant and it is expected that the appeal process will be completed by the end of 2019. Pero pinag-uusapan natin dito is 2018. So the question is, what amount should be reported as a receivable on December 31, 2018? Yung receivable, di ba, asset na ito. Ibig sabihin, dapat probable na meron ka talagang meron kang makukuha or economic benefits and measured reliably. Sabi dito, the attorney believed that it is highly probable that an award will be upheld on the appeal, but that judgment may be reduced by 40%. Ayan, kitang-kita na natin agad na highly probable yan. Ano ang magiging treatment natin kapag sinabing probable? So, what amount should be reported as a receivable? Tingnan natin kung anong magiging treatment. The answer is the contingent asset only disclosed when probable and measurable. So the asset and related gain are recognized only when realized. Ibig sabihin, i-record mo lang yung asset saka yung related gain kapag talagang sure na makakatanggap ka na talaga ng 1.5 M based doon sa estimate. So kung wala pa, contingent lang yon. And kung contingent lang yon at probable, disclose to the notes to the financial statements. So next problem. In 20X1, there was a robbery in one of the ABC's branches. There has been dispute on the 100 million insurance claim that ABC has presented to its insurance provider. On December 31, 20X1, the insurance company approved the payment of 80% of ABC's claim. So meron nang naganap na payment dito. So ABC received a letter that the settlement check for that amount had been mailed, but such check was received only on January 5, 20X2. The question is, what is the entry to be made by ABC on December 31, 20X1? So, ang magiging entry natin dyan, So ito yung example ng virtually certain, yung 100% yung chance of occurrence. So dito, ang magiging entry natin dito pagdating na December 31, 20X1 is claims receivable, debit, and credit gain on settlement of insurance. 100 million times 80%. So ang amount na ilalagay natin dito is 80 million. Since the claim is virtually certain, hindi natin ito consider as a contingent asset. Pero the recognition of the approved payment is appropriate. So that's it. So that's all for contingent asset. Next is the measurement that will be discussed by Ms. Jonalyn May de Vera.
Okay, so magandang araw po. So next po is measurement of provision. So how shall we measure provisions? Provision should be measured at the best estimate of the expenditure required to settle the present obligation at the end of the reporting period. Making the estimate requires management judgment, supplemented by experience from similar transactions, and in some cases, reports from independent experts. The estimate also considers events after the reporting period. So, sa pag-measure ng provision, ang general rule is the best estimate. And also, there are two approaches on how to compute provision or the amount of provision. So, the first one is the expected value. It is used when measurement of provision involves large population of items, then the provision is measured through weighted average of all possible outcome by their probability. So kapag sinabi na expected value approach, here, the amount of provision is actually equal to the sum of all the possible amounts multiplied to the corresponding probability. Ibig sabihin, if maraming possible amount na given sa problem, just multiply those possible amount na given sa mga sa problem to their corresponding probability. And then, kunin mo yung sum ng mga product nila, and then that is the amount of provision. Second approach is used when single obligation is being measured, and then the provision would be set is as most likely outcome when measuring provision. It is called midpoint of the range approach. Kapag sinabi nating midpoint of the range approach, ang ibig sabihin niya is we will use this approach when there is a continuous range of possible outcome. And each point in that range of possible is as likely as the other. Ibig sabihin, walang nangingibabaw. So, kapag sinabi ng problem, the amount of liability is between 100,000 to 140,000, the midpoint of that range will be the amount of provision. So, how to compute midpoint? Well, midpoint is equal to the highest amount plus the lowest amount in the range and then divided by 2. Pero hindi po lahat ng midpoint is reasonable. Gaya ng sinabi ni Miss Ira, the best estimate should be reasonable. Let's say binigyan ka ng range na sobrang broad. Let's say yung range is 20,000 to 2 million. Hindi na siya reasonable because sobrang lawak na ng range. Hindi na siya makatotohanan. So that means the amount of provision will be equal to 0. In order for a liability to be recognized, number 1, there must be a probable future economic benefits. Pangalawa, dapat the amount of liability can be measured reliably. So if the range is so wide or broad like 20,000 to 2 million, the amount of estimate is no longer reasonable. The answer will be 0 because sobrang broad na yung range. So next po is the recording of provision. Provisions are normally recognized as a debit to expense or loss and a credit to an estimated liability account. However, sometimes a provision form parts of the cost of an asset. For example, provisions for restoration and decommissioning costs are capitalized as part of the cost of a PPE. So in recognition of provision, we are going to debit the expense or asset and credit the liability or provision. In unwinding the discount, finance cost is debited and liability or provision is credited. In the use of provision, debit liability or provision and credit cash or bank or etc. And in reimbursement asset is debited and expense is credited. So next, we have an example of illustration that we are going to answer to further understand how to calculate and record the provisions. So the first illustration is best estimate. In 20X1, ABC Company received a court order requiring the cleanup of environmental damages caused by one of ABC's factory. ABC has no other realistic alternative but to comply with the court order. Other entities have incurred around 15 million for similar cleanup. However, ABC's best estimate of the cost of the cleanup is 20 million. So first, let's analyze the problem. Is there a present obligation? The answer is yes. Environmental damages have already been caused. Second, is the outflow probable? Yes, ABC has no other realistic alternative but to comply with the court order. Third and last one, can the outflow be measured reliably? Yes, the problem indicates a best estimate of 20 million. To conclude, the provision must be accrued and disclosed in the amount of 20 million. But take note, before a provision can be recognized, the answer to all of the question must be yes. If any of the question has a no for an answer, no provision is recognized. When the provision is accrued, a disclosure must also be made. So to entry the provision, we are going to debit environmental cleanup cost 20 million. And credit estimated liability for cleanup cost 20 million. So that is how we measure in best estimate. So yung 20 million po is the best estimate sa provision na ito. So next example is illustration to expected value. In 2000X1, ABC Company recalled a product due to a possible defect caused by malfunctioning factory equipment. The products recalled will be repaired free of charge. ABC is uncertain whether all the products recalled will have the possible defect. However, the following estimate was made ABC's engineers and managerial accountants and approved by the board of directors. So these are the repair cost and probability of the illustration 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the repair cost to its probability to get the expected value and get the sum of all the expected value to get the total value. So here in example, sasagutan po natin. I-multiply po natin yung repair cost sa probability to get the expected value, and then we're going to total it to get the total value of the provision. Okay, so 20 million multiplied by 5%, that is 1 million. And 15 million multiplied by 20%, just going to get my calculator. So 15 million multiplied by 20%, we have 3 million. Next is 10 million multiplied by 35%, that is 3,500,000. Next is 5 million divided by 40%, That is 200,000. So what we are going to sum this all up to get the total expected value. So that all adds up to 9,500,000. So to entry to record the provision, debit repair cost 9,500,000 and credit estimated liability for repair cost 9,500,000. So that is how we get the expected value. So the third and last one example, in 20x1, a lawsuit was filed against ABC Company for patent infringement. The plaintiff is claiming 100 million in damages. ABC Company's legal counsel believes that it is probable that ABC Company will lose the lawsuit and pay the damages of not less than 10 million, but not more than 100 million. The probability of any amount within the range is as likely as any other amount within that range. The plaintiff has offered to settle the lawsuit out of court for 90 million, but ABC did not agree to the settlement. What amount of provision is reported in ABC Company's 20x1 financial statement? So to get the provision, using the midpoint approach, we are going to get the highest amount plus the lowest amount in the range, then divided by 2. So the highest amount is 100 million and the lowest amount is 10 million. So when we add that 2 and we will get 110 million. So then we're going to divide it by 2 and we will get 55 million. So this 55 million is the amount of the provision. So to record the provision, probable loss on lawsuit is 55 million. And credit to estimated liability on pending lawsuit 55 million. So that is how we record the provision. So ang next po is risk and uncertainties will be presented by Ms. Jim Rose Ngo.
So let's go on to the risk and uncertainties. Estimate take into account risk and uncertainties. Thus, estimates may be increased by a risk adjustment factor to provide an allowance for imprecision inherent in estimates. This, however, does not mean that the entity can make excessive provisions or can deliberately overstate liabilities. Present value. If the effect of time value of money is material, the estimate of a provision is discounted to its present value using a pre-tax discount rate. This is usually the case for provisions for restoration and decommissioning costs where cash outflow occur only after a relatively long period of time from the date of initial recognition. Illustration 1. Present value. A manufacturer gives warranties at the same time of sale. The manufacturer undertakes to make goods by repair or replacement manufacturing defects that become apparent within 1 year from the date of sale. On the basis of experience, it is probable, more likely than not, that there will be some claims under the warranties. Sales of 10 million pesos were made evenly throughout 20X1. At December 31, 20X1, the expenditures for warranty repairs and replacements for products sold in 20X1 are expected to be made 50% in 20X1 and 50% in 20X2. Assume for simplicity that all the 20X2 outflows of economic benefits related to the warranty repairs and replacement takes place on June 30, 20X2. Experience indicate that 95% of products sold require no warranty repairs. 3% of products sold require minor repairs costing 10% of the sale price. And 2% of the products sold require major repairs or replacement costing 90% of sale price. The entity has no reason to believe future warranty claims will be different from its experience. At December 31, 20X1, the appropriate discount factor for cash outflow expected to occur on June 30, 20X2 is 0.95238. Furthermore, an appropriate risk adjustment factor to reflect the uncertainties in the cash flow estimates is an increment of 6% to the probability weighted expected cash flows. Requirement: compute for the warranty provision at December 31, 20X1. The solution. Analysis. Step 1. Is there a present obligation? Yes. Products have already been sold. The obligating event for warranties is the act of selling. Step 2. Is the outflow probable? Yes. Based on ABC's past experience, it is probable that there will be some claims under the warranties. Step 3. Can the outflow be measured reliably? Yes. Sufficient information is available to make a reliable estimate. Conclusion: a provision must be accrued and disclosed. The amount of the provision estimated is as follows. Minor repairs is 30,000. The 30,000 is computed as the sales of 10 million pesos times the 3% of the products sold require minor repairs and the 10% of the sale price. So 10 million times 3% times 10%. The major repairs is 180,000. 180,000 is computed as 10 million times 2% times 90% of sale price. 30,000 plus 180,000 is total to 210,000 multiplied by present value factor, which is already given, 0.95238. Is equal to 200,000 multiplied by risk adjustment, which is 100% plus 6% is equal to 106%. So 200,000 times 106% is equal to 212,000. The 6% in the risk adjustment is gotten here. This one, 6%. Increment of 6% of the probability weighted expected cash flows. So multiply by amounts to be settled in 20x2, which is 50%. The 50% is from here. The 50% in 20x2 at December 31, 20x1. The expenditure for warranty repairs and replacement for products sold in 20x1 are expected to be made 50% 20x1 and 50% in 20x2. So 212,000 times 50% is equal to 106,000, which is our warranty provision for December 31, 20x1. Next, illustration 2.1, present value. An entity is the defendant in a patent infringement lawsuit. The entity's lawyer believed that there is a 30% chance that the court will dismiss the case and the entity will incur no outflow of economic benefits. However, If the court rules in favor of the claimant, the lawyers believe that there is a 20% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 200,000 pesos or the amount sought by the claimant, and an 80% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 100,000 pesos or the amount that was recently awarded by the same judge in a similar case. Other outcomes are unlikely. The court is expected to rule in late December 20x2. There is no indication that the claimant will settle out of court. A 7% risk adjustment factor to the probability weighted expected cash flows is considered appropriate to reflect the uncertainties in the cash flow estimates. An appropriate discount rate is 10% per year. Requirement: compute for the provision for lawsuit at December 31, 20x1. Solution: a 20% chance, 200,000 times 20%, 40,000. So the 200,000 and 20% here is gotten here. In the 20% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 200,000. And at 80% is 100,000 times 80%, which is 80%, which is here. 80% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 100,000 pesos. So 40,000 less 80,000 is equal to 120,000. Multiply by PV of 1 at 10% and is equal to 1, 0.90909. So this is, because it is not given, you will compute it by 1 plus 0.10 raised to negative 1. So you will get this one, this answer. So 120,000 times 0.90909 is equal to 109,091. Multiply by risk adjustment, which is 100% plus 7% is equal to 107%, is equal to 116,727. Multiply by probability of settlement, which is 100,000 less 30% is equal to 70%. So the 30% is gotten here. The entity's lawyer believe there is a 30% chance that the court will dismiss the case. So if the 30% is the court will dismiss the case, so the remaining 70% will not dismiss. So that is the probability of settlement. So 116,727 times 70% is equal to the 81,709, which is our provision for lawsuit on December 31, 20x1. Next, illustration 2.2 present value. The facts are the same as in the immediate preceding illustration. However, in this question, because of extremely rare circumstances, disclosure of some of the information about the case required by Clause 37 can be expected to prejudice seriously the position of the entity in the dispute over the alleged breach of patent. Requirement: how should the entity account for the transaction described in the preceding illustration? Answer: recognize a provision measurement at the amount determined in the preceding illustration and disclose the general nature of the dispute, together with the fact that and reason why the information has not been disclosed. Next, illustration 2.3, present value. The facts are the same as in the previous illustration. However, in this question, the entity's lawyer believed there is a 60% chance that the court will dismiss the case and the entity will incur note at flow requirement. How should the entity account for the transaction described in the preceding illustration? Answer. Analysis. Step 1. Is there a present obligation? Yes. ABC is currently a defendant in a patent infringement lawsuit. Step 2. Is the outflow probable? No. A 40% chance of occurrence, 100% minus 60%, is not probable. Probable means more likely than not. It connotes more than 50% chance of occurrence. Step 3. Can the outflow be measured reliably? Yes, sufficient information is available to make reliable estimate. Conclusion. A provision is not accrued. The entity shall disclose only a contingent liability or possible obligation. So next reporter, Miss Margie, please.
So good afternoon, everyone. My part in our report in past 37 is future events, expected disposal of assets, reimbursements, changes in provisions, and uses of provisions. So first is future events. Future events that may affect the amount required to settle an obligation shall be reflected in the amount of revision where there is sufficient objective evidence that they will occur. Example, the penalty of environmental damages may be affected by a legislation. If a new law regarding the increase of a penalty in that obligation will be enacted, it is only anticipated when that law is virtually certain that it will be enacted. Otherwise, it's not appropriate to anticipate it. Next is expected disposal of assets. Gain from the disposal of assets shall not be taken into account in measuring a provision, even if that asset give rise to that provision. Instead, gains are separately recognized when that disposal occurs. Reimbursements. Where some or all of the expenditure required to settle a provision is expected to be reimbursed by another party, the reimbursement shall be recognized when and only when it is virtually certain that reimbursement will be received. If the entity settles the obligation, the reimbursement shall be treated as a separate asset. The amount recognized for the reimbursement shall not exceed the amount of the provision. In a statement of comprehensive income, the expense relating to a provision may be presented net of the amount recognized for reimbursement. And sometimes, an entity is able to look to another party to pay part for all of the expenditures required to settle a provision. Example is insurance contracts, indemnity clauses, or suppliers' warranties. The other party may either reimburse amounts paid by entity or pay the amounts directly. For further discussion, let's have an illustration. MCCO is engaged in logistics services. During the year, a warehouse was destroyed by a fire. It was estimated that MCCO probably paid around 43.6 million in damages cost of goods owned by the customers that were contained in that destroyed warehouse. The contents of the warehouse at any given point of time are insured for 23 million. Anti's claim for the insurance has been approved for payment by the insurance company. Required entries to be recorded. So, we have an entries to be recorded in December 31, 2021 loss on fire, 43,600,000, and credit estimated liability and casualty, 43,600,000. Since there is a liability dun, so may liability tayo. Since yung sa destroyed warehouse contain, meron dun na goods na own na ng customers. So, ibig sabihin, hindi na sa atin yun. kailangan na lang i-deliver but it's in the warehouse. So, ibig sabihin, may liability tayo sa customer. Next is yung receivable, yung insurance. December 31, 20X1, insurance claims receivable debit and credit gain on insurance 23 million pesos. Then sabi sa standard, virtually certain lang daw yung i-recognize when it comes to reimbursement. But since dito sa illustration, ang sabi niya, approved for payment na makakatanggap tayo from that insurance company. So, meron na tayong i-recognize na insurance claims receivable. Mapapansin nyo na dito sa second entry natin, hindi natin debit yung estimated liability and casualty. Instead, nag-record tayo ng separate asset ayon sa sabi ng standard. Pero, pag i-present na natin to sa comprehensive income, pwede nating na which have the amount of 20 million pesos. Nakuha natin yung 20 million base dun sa loss on fire 43,600,000 and sinubtract natin yung gain na 23 million pesos. Next illustration is deductible clause. On January 1, 20X2, an explosion occurred at Siaco's plant, causing extensive property damage to area buildings. Although no claims had yet been asserted against Siaco as of March 10, 20X2, CS management and council concluded that it is likely that claims will be asserted and that is probable. And probable dito, meron na tayong provision. That MC will be responsible for damages. CIA 4.4 million comprehensive public liability policy has a 300,000 deductible cost. CIA estimates an outflow equal to its net liability on a comprehensive public liability policy. CIA cost financial statements were authorized for issue on March 30, 20X2. How should the event above be reported in CIA's December 31, 20X? Financial statements. So answer is a note disclosure only, including the probable loss of 300,000 since yan yung deductible cost natin. Meron siyang disclosure sa December 31 since it happened after the reporting period and wala pa namang, and yung issue 1 nung financial statements natin in March 30, 20X2. But specifically speaking, wala pa tayong talagang liability nung 20X1, kaya no disclosure muna. Pero pag nangyari yung disclosure on December 31, 20X1, yung mismong reporting period, meron tayong 300,000 na provision. Yung extent lang nung estimate outflow natin. So changes in provisions. Provisions will be reviewed at the end of its reporting period and adjusted to reflect the current best estimate. If it is no longer probable that an outflow resources embodying economic benefits will be required to settle the obligation, the provision shall be reversed. Since gumagamit tayo ng estimate, pwede itong magbago. So, nire-review siya for each reporting period. And also, yung required ng provision is probable. So, pag naging possible or removed na yung provision natin, hindi na siya pwedeng na ma-recognize as provisions pa. Kaya, review of those provisions are required in each reporting period. So next is use of provisions. A provision shall only be used only for expenditures for which the provision was originally recognized. So ayon sa paragraph 62 ng PAS 37, only expenditures that relate to the original provision are set against it. Setting expenditures against a provision that was originally recognized for another purpose would conceal the impact of two events. So, ibig sabihin, kunyari, may loss on fire tayo. Example, dun sa contents ng warehouse. And yung contents ng warehouse na yun is naka-insured. Tapos ngayon, nagkaroon tayo ng explosion dun sa building. And may mga nadamay na mga other building dun sa explosion na yun. yung insurance ng contents ng warehouse is hindi natin pwedeng expenditures dun sa loss on exposure. I mean, dun sa loss on exposure natin. Hindi daw yun pwede, sabi ng standard. So, yung insurance ng contents is para dun sa contents lang na nadamay dun sa loss on fire natin. So, there's a sample illustration regarding the changes in provision. In 20x1, Carsico recognized a provision for a probable loss on pending losses of 450,000 pesos. The entry is on December 31, 20x1, probable loss on lawsuit for 50,000 and credit estimated liability and pending losses for 50,000. So, the lawsuit remains unsettled in 20x2. Nasa same areas as estimate of the provision. Sabi niya, di ba? I-review yung provision in its reporting period. And Carsi determined that the probable loss and the pending loss should be 500,000. So, nabago yung estimated liability dun sa lawsuit na yun. So, meron tayo ngayon na entry na debit probable loss and lawsuit, an estimated liability and pending lawsuit of 50,000 pesos, which is yung difference ng 500,000 and 450 na i-recognize na natin. I mean, this is supposed to be December 31, 20x2. So, may three assumptions tayo. And these assumptions are not related to each other. So, first assumption natin is the lawsuit was settled for 750,000 in 20x3. The entry to record the settlement is estimated liability and pending lawsuit debit of 500,000. And yung credit natin is 750,000 na cash. Since meron tayong difference, yan ay magiging loss and lawsuit natin na 250,000. Since hindi natin na-recognize yan nung 20x2, meron tayong difference na loss na 250,000 na i-recognize. Next naman is assumption 2. The lawsuit was settled for 480,000 in 20x3. The entry to record the settlement is estimated liability pending lawsuit debit of 500,000 and cash credit of 480,000. Since meron tayong difference, 20,000, nagkaroon tayo ng gain. Since na-recognize natin na 500,000, tapos 480,000 lang pala yung babayaran natin na settlement, is nagkaroon tayo ng gain na 20,000 pesos. In 20x3, Carsico win the lawsuit. None was paid on the settlement. The entry to record the settlement is reversal na. Since wala tayong binayaran na lawsuit on 20x3 at nag-recognize tayo in 20x1 na lawsuit, i-reverse natin ngayon. So, the entry to record is debit estimated liability pending lawsuit 500,000 and gain on reversal of provision 500,000 pesos. Notice na never na nating ni-restate yung others presented in other financial statements. Since this is like change in estimate, it is presented prospectively. Binabago na lang natin perspective. Ibig sabihin, at the current financial reporting period and next reporting period, hindi na natin pakikialaman yung prior periods. So that's all for my report.
Next is this diagram below summarizes the main recognition requirements of PAS 37. So let's start. Present obligation as a result of an obligating event. If no, tatanungin natin kung possible obligation siya. If no, again, do nothing. And if present obligation as a result of an obligating event? If yes, tatanong natin kung probable outflow siya. Kung no, it will be disclosed as contingent liability. Kung probable outflow naman siya, tatanong natin kung reliable estimate ba siya. Kung no, disclose pa din as contingent liability. But if it is a present obligation as a result of an obligating event, and it is probable outflow and has a reliable estimate, we have to provide. It is considered as provision. So here are the summary of our report. We have reported provisions, recognition of it, contingent liabilities, contingent assets, measurement, risks and uncertainties, present value, reimbursements, changes in provisions. So since PAS 37 has been assigned to two groups for the application of the recognition principles and other common types of provisions, it will be reported by the next group. So we, group 20, are giving you a Bible verse, Proverbs chapter 16 verse 3. Commit your work to the Lord and your plans will be established. Remember that all hard works will be paid off. Just have faith in Him always and everything will be fine in God's grace. Thank you for listening and God bless us all.